I'll never forget the moment she marched across my lawn like she owned the entire neighborhood, her heels clicking so sharply against the pavement that even the birds went silent as if they sensed the storm coming, and before I even had time to step off my porch, she jabbed a finger at me and shouted, You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your things and leave this property." And for a second I just stood there frozen, trying to process the fact that a complete stranger was threatening to throw me out of my own home. But then I remembered why I needed to share this story. So before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from, because this one still makes my heart race every time I think about it. My mind scrambled between confusion and disbelief as the morning sunlight stretched across the driveway, the warm smell of cut grass mixing with the cold tension radiating from her expression, and I couldn't help but notice how her laminated HOA ID badge swung aggressively with every breath she took, like she practiced this kind of confrontation daily. While my fingers tightened around the coffee mug in my hand, the ceramic suddenly too hot to hold as I stared at her in stunned silence, wondering how someone could sound so certain about something so completely wrong. It had started off as a quiet morning, one of those peaceful days where the breeze feels soft and the neighborhood noises blend into something calming, and I remember stepping onto my porch just minutes before she appeared, breathing in the smell of fresh paint from the railing I'd finished working on last night, feeling a rare sense of pride because buying this house had been the biggest milestone of my life, especially being younger than most homeowners around here, and I'd worked years to make this moment possible, pouring every late night and saved paycheck into it. The neighborhood usually had a slow, gentle rhythm in the mornings, with sprinklers hissing faintly and dogs tugging their owners along the sidewalk, and I remember waving at old Mr. Raymond across the street as he watered his plants like he did every single day, and nothing gave any sign that my calm would be shattered in minutes, yet something about the stillness felt off even before she arrived, like the air carried a warning, but I brushed it off and walked back inside to grab my keys without imagining the chaos waiting for me outside. When I stepped back out, she was already halfway up my driveway, her sharp blonde bob bouncing with each furious step as if anger itself pushed her forward, and she looked me up and down with this judgmental squint, like she'd already decided what kind of person I was before even learning my name. And then she raised her voice loud enough to turn 3 neighbors' heads as she declared, "We don't allow tenants under 30 in this community," which made my pulse spike because it wasn't just rude, it was completely untrue, and the sheer confidence she delivered it with gave me chills I couldn't shake. Her voice carried that certain shrill edge some HOA board members use when they want to intimidate someone into submission, the kind that makes your stomach twist even when you know you're right, and she held a clipboard stacked with papers like she was about to personally evict me with nothing but printed nonsense, while my brain tried to keep up with the absurdity unfolding, and neighbors started slowing their strolls to watch, hovering on the sidewalk like they sensed something bigger brewing between us. I swallowed hard and stared at her badge because something about it felt wrong, maybe the cheap plastic shine or the uneven laminate lines, but before I could examine it further, she snapped, "Stop stalling," as if I'd committed some crime, and when her eyes locked onto mine, I felt something cold crawl down my spine, but I steadied my breath and answered as evenly as I could, "Ma'am, this is my house." And even saying that felt surreal, like I had to remind myself it was true just to stay grounded in the moment. Her lips curled into this mocking smirk as she said, "Oh, sweetheart, no it's not, we've checked the records." And she slapped her clipboard for emphasis, the papers rustling sharply in the breeze, and I felt my patience thinning with every condescending word that came out of her mouth. But I kept my voice calm because losing control meant giving her exactly what she wanted, and something told me this woman lived for causing scenes, especially with an audience watching. When she stepped closer, invading my personal space so tightly I could smell her overpowering floral perfume mixing with the morning air, she jabbed her finger toward my porch and said, "Get your stuff and go before this gets serious." Her tone dripping with fake authority, and I could almost see the thrill in her eyes at the idea of someone folding under her pressure. But I wasn't going anywhere, and the fact that she was so certain made the whole situation even stranger, like she knew something I didn't, and for a moment my mind flickered with the thought that maybe someone had filed something against me without my knowledge. But then she added, "People like you can't afford homes like this anyway," loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and I heard a couple gasps from across the street as heat flushed up my neck, because the insult wasn't just aggressive, it was personal, and every nerve in me bristled at the assumption. But before I could respond, she tightened her grip on the clipboard like she was preparing for some dramatic declaration, and the moment stretched so tightly it felt like the whole neighborhood held its. I stood there trying to piece together why she was so convinced I didn't belong here. And before I could correct her again, she flipped her clipboard around to show me a printed sheet with my address on top, except the name under owner wasn't mine, which sent a jolt of confusion straight through my chest, because I knew for a fact every document had gone through properly when I bought this place, and the idea that something might have been tampered with tightened my breath, while she grinned like she'd just shown me undeniable proof. But deep down something felt staged, like she held that paper with the intention of waving it in someone's face from the moment she walked out of her door. And the neighbors leaned in a little closer, whispering among themselves as if this were a midday performance, their eyes darting between us like spectators waiting for the next swing of verbal punches, while she basked in the attention like it was fuel keeping her anger alive, and I could feel the weight of their stares pressing into my back. But instead of shrinking, I stepped forward, making her flinch ever so slightly, and that tiny reaction told me she wasn't expecting pushback, which only made me more certain that something was off, that she wasn't just mistaken. She was trying to force an outcome. I took the paper from her hand, and the moment my fingertips brushed it, I knew the texture felt wrong. The ink strangely uneven, the formatting nothing like the actual documents I had stored safely inside, and my heartbeat picked up as I scanned the lines, noticing misspelled sections, mismatched fonts that screamed forgery, and when I glanced back at her, she crossed her arms in this impatient huff, as if I was supposed to accept the fraud as gospel. But instead I said quietly, "This is fake," which made her eyes widen for a split second before she covered it with another condescending scoff, her voice loud as she barked, "No one will believe you over me." Her certainty made my skin prickle, because normal people don't prepare fake paperwork to force someone out of their home, and a deeper part of me whispered that this wasn't just an HOA tantrum. It was personal, targeted, intentional, and when she stepped closer again, her perfume hit me like a thick cloud, mixing with the smell of warm pavement as tension pulsed between us, while a couple neighbors shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift in tone, and I felt something inside me harden as I said, "I'm calling the real HOA." Watching her face twitch with panic she tried desperately to hide. Just as I reached for my phone, she slapped her hand over mine, her fingers icy and trembling despite the heat of the morning, and she hissed through clenched teeth, "You don't get to call anyone." As if she had any authority at all, and a murmur spread through the small crowd because even they realized she'd crossed a line, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. But she yanked her hand away quickly and tried to recover with a louder voice as she shouted, "This community has rules and you're violating them," waving her clipboard once more, though her grip wasn't nearly as steady as before. I could feel the shift. Her power was cracking, her performance unraveling under the weight of her own lies, and I decided to push just a little further as I pulled my actual deed from my pocket folder, the one I'd intended to take to the bank later, and when she saw the official seal, her face drained of color, her jaw dropping before she snapped it shut in a weak attempt to regain control. But the neighbors were already murmuring louder now, pointing at the real document, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others whispering to each other as the truth started to spread through the air like wildfire. When I raised the real deed higher, letting the sunlight reflect off the embossed stamp, she stumbled back a step like she'd been physically pushed, her heels scraping against the concrete as she sputtered, that can't be real." Her voice cracking with each word, and the mask she'd been wearing since she stormed onto my property began slipping rapidly, her breath quickening, her eyes darting between the paper and the growing cluster of witnesses, while I felt a surge of calm wash over me, knowing she'd finally hit the wall she'd been speeding toward from the start, yet she still tried to salvage her crumbling authority with a shaky, "I'll get the sheriff involved." But before she could dial anything, I held up a hand, steady and unwavering, and said, "Good. I'd like them to see this forged document." And the way her face twisted, fear, anger, disbelief all fighting for space, made it clear she hadn't expected me to fight back with facts, and a hush fell over the street as everyone realized she wasn't just wrong. She was cornered, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I felt control shift fully into my grasp, heavy, solid, undeniable. The moment she realized the sheriff would see that forged paper, her bravado shattered like glass under a hammer, and she lunged forward in a frantic attempt to snatch it from my hand, her movements jerky and desperate, but I stepped back just in time, holding the deed against my chest while the neighbors gasped as if watching a high-stakes showdown unfold in slow motion, and she froze mid-reach as she noticed everyone staring, their expressions shifting from curiosity to condemnation, the weight of judgment settling heavily on her stiff shoulders, and she whispered a trembling, "Give that to me," though even she sounded unconvinced she had any authority left. I kept my voice even as I said, "You forged documents," and tried to evict a legal homeowner. Letting the words hang in the air long enough to make her flinch, her complexion paling as murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd, and before she could conjure another excuse, I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's department, my fingers steady, my voice clear, the contrast to her unraveling state impossible to miss as she backed away slowly like a cornered animal searching for an exit. But every pair of eyes stayed locked on her, sealing her fate with silent witness. While we waited for law enforcement, she paced wildly across my lawn, muttering to herself as if trying to rewrite the reality already unfolding, tearing at her own forged papers in some frantic attempt to destroy the evidence, but bits of the pages scattered across the grass like white confetti of guilt, fluttering under the light wind as neighbors documented everything with their phones, each camera aimed at her panic, and she spun around screaming, "You're all making a mistake," though her voice cracked so hard it sounded more like a plea than a command. I stood still, breathing slowly, letting the steady rhythm keep me grounded as the tension simmered around us, feeling each inhale grow lighter with the knowledge that I wasn't the one in trouble. And when the sheriff's car finally turned onto our street, lights flashing silently, she froze completely, her arms stiff at her sides, her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white, as if she could hold back the consequences through sheer force. But as the car rolled to a stop, the truth landed fully on her shoulders, heavy and unrelenting. The sheriff stepped out, adjusting his vest and glancing around the crowd before approaching me first, asking calmly, "You made the call?" And I handed him both papers, the real deed and her forgery, watching his eyes narrow as he compared them, his jaw tightening with each passing second, and when he looked up at her, his expression shifted into something stern and serious, his voice dropping into a tone that made even the neighbors stiffen as he said, "Ma'am, where did you get this falsified document?" And she stuttered, her excuses tripping over each other until they formed nothing but tangled nonsense. The sheriff wasn't fooled for a second, and when he motioned for his deputy to step forward, her entire body sagged as if the last of her strength evaporated. Her arms lifted reluctantly as they placed cuffs around her wrists, the metallic click echoing through the stunned silence of neighborhood, and she whimpered, "This wasn't supposed to happen," like she truly believed her lies were strong enough to hold, but reality had caught up to her with ruthless precision, making her fantasies crumble into dust at her feet. Neighbors whispered in shock as the deputy guided her toward the patrol car, her once confident stride replaced by trembling, uneven steps, and I watched her glance back at me with a mix of resentment and regret, though neither emotion could save her now, as the sheriff explained she'd be charged with document forgery, harassment, and attempted fraudulent eviction, each word landing like another door slamming shut behind her, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief washing through me, the moment surreal even as it unfolded in front of my eyes. When the patrol car finally drove off, the neighborhood slowly returned to life, conversations rising again as people approached me, offering apologies, support, and shock at how far she had gone, and I breathed in deeply, the scent of my freshly cut lawn filling my lungs with something that felt like reclaiming my space, my ownership, my peace, the weight that had pressed on my chest all morning finally lifting as I stepped back toward my porch, knowing justice had been served exactly as it should. And that's why you should never underestimate the truth, never back down when you know you're right, and never let false authority shake your confidence, because real authority stands on facts, integrity, and proof, not intimidation or forged papers. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and comment your thoughts below, because your support is what keeps these stories alive.